So, hi Rivkah.
Hi Bob.
Tell us about how long you've been in Israel.
How long my body has been in Israel. I've been in Israel since July of 2010, but my heart and soul has been in Israel a lot longer. I actually first came to visit the very first time in 1996 when I got married. It was our honeymoon trip, but really on September 11, 2001, I had a very strong communication from God that I needed to move to Israel. It was so clear to me that that was the direction that I was going to go to. And after that, my family wasn't quite ready to come, but we did start coming more frequently. We bought an apartment. We came 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a year until we were able to be here full time.
So what particularly triggered that decision?
It wasn't a decision as much as it was a communication. I woke up that morning like the rest of the world, thinking it was an ordinary morning, and almost instantaneously I got a communication from heaven that our lives in America were temporary as Jewish people and that we belonged in Israel. And I felt it very, very strongly. And I remember speaking to my husband about it that very day. I remember saying, you know, if it's not safe for Jewish people in America anymore, then what are we still doing here? We really should just be in Israel.
So we're talking about the 9/11 event?
Correct. I'm not the only one. I've heard from many other Jewish people that something about that shattered their sense. Now, my children are 4th generation American, and I'm not able to say that before that day I really seriously considered a future in Israel. But on that day, it became very clear to me, like I said, I really think it was God talking to me, it became very clear that our lives in America, that America was the last of the host countries of the Jewish people, at least in my family line, and that our future was elsewhere.
Tell us about what you're wearing right now.
Okay. So there's a Jewish law that Orthodox women, after they get married, that they cover their hair, cover their head. You may be familiar, I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that traditionally men wear something on their head, which is in deference to God above. Women in the Orthodox tradition, the most traditional women don't do that, but we do cover our hair as well as our heads. And some of that is a mark of being a married woman. There's a whole range of ways that Jewish women cover their hair, and you may be surprised to know that there's actually a whole movement of women outside of Judaism who cover for various reasons, and there's on social media there's groups of women like that. But I cover my head always outside of my home because that's my understanding of Jewish law. I choose to wear scarves instead of a wig, for example, or sometimes I wear hats, depends on whatever. Sometimes it's always based on Jewish law, but there's a fashion element, so I coordinate. But it is often the case that the way a woman covers her hair says something about the part of the Jewish community that she most identifies with.
Today, in Judaism, the role of women is being discussed. I hear it discussed from time to time. How do you see that? What is that discussion that's going on within Orthodox Judaism?
Well, that's a great question. I believe and teach from the perspective that that God had a different idea in mind for the relationship between men and women, and that idea got changed in the Garden of Eden based on what happened between Adam and Eve, and that all of human history has been a correction for what happened in the Garden of Eden, but that as we get closer and closer to Messianic days and as we get closer to living in God's perfection, that all of that is sorting out. whenever a community, especially a traditional community, has to face a change like what's coming in the relationship between men and women, there is always backlash. And so there's a lot of energy around this. There are people that are pushing closer to resolving the imbalance between masculine and feminine spiritual energy in Judaism, and there's people who are pushing back. And so it's a very active and lively conversation because it's very much in process in Orthodox Judaism today. Some of the more liberal Jewish movements it appears that they've resolved this tension by essentially making Jewish women the same as Jewish men. That probably won't be where the Orthodox community settles, but it is still very much an active discussion at this time in history.
Some people may know that you are a writer and an editor. You write news stories for some Israeli-based publications. Some of your writing has gone towards things of the end of days and or the Messiah. Where is that coming from inside you?
So when I have to just back up and say I was born a Jew, but I was not, I didn't have any Jewish education as a child, and I didn't have any particular affiliation to Judaism. It was like something that was true about me, but it didn't have a lot of relevance. When I started to become interested in Judaism in a serious way in about 30 years ago, one of the very first things I bumped up against was this issue of the difference between the way men and women were treated in Orthodox Judaism and what I knew from my secular life. So for a number of years, I delved very deeply into this issue of women in Judaism, women in the Bible, and so forth. And that was my burning, burning passion. After a while, I began to integrate some of these ideas, and I started to get really turned on by Israel. And I became, this is just my whole adult life, there's always something. So I learned everything I could about Israel in advance of coming here, and I talked about it a lot, I read about it a lot, I wrote about it and so forth, and I have to say that I now live here, and some of that has become integrated into who I am, and my next big agenda, my next big project is this end of days. And so in a sense, all these three things come together for me, but I have really moved into, I guess, my third big lifetime project, which is helping people prepare for what I think is imminent, and that is the transition from this world into Messianic days.
So the course that you're teaching at Root Source is Women in the Bible. Where did that come from?
So now that you know a little bit more about my story, it may make some more sense that when I first encountered some traditional Jewish perspective on the difference between men and women, I was disheartened at some of what I heard. And I was also an academic. I came from an academic background. I said, I need to find out for myself. I need to go into the sources for myself. And so I started studying the Bible in a much more serious way, and also the rabbinic tradition that goes along with the Bible. And I found an enormous wellspring of Jewish wisdom on Bible stories that have women characters in them, on the stories of women, and there's a lot there. And it gave me tremendous, tremendous comfort and tremendous sense that maybe there actually was a place for me in the traditional Jewish perspective, which of course now it's 30 years later and I'm still here, so there was. And my desire in working with this material in Root Source is to share some of that, because I think when you read the biblical text just straight, just the text itself without the depth of commentary, there's a lot that is missing, and it looks like the stories are mostly about men, but there's a lot of depth in the rabbinic commentary, and that's what I bring to my classes.
Tell us about your name and how that fits into your course.
Well, when I was born Jewish in America, and I was given what I now call it like an English name, meaning I was given both a Hebrew name, because that's what Jewish families did and still do. Even if they live in a country where Hebrew is not the language, they usually give their children if they're not Orthodox, they give their children a local name. So I had an English name that I used for until I was about 30 or so, but I also knew that I had a Hebrew name, and it was never relevant in any way because of the way that I lived as a Jew, but I always knew what it was. I always knew that my name was Rivkah. And as I started to become more involved in the Jewish community and so forth, I decided, you know what, there's a tradition that the Jewish people the Israelite slaves in Egypt retained their Jewish names, and that was a very important thing, and so I transitioned to that. As it happens, Rivkah is also one of the foremothers of the Bible, and so there's a whole set of lessons in Root Source about Rivkah as a character, not me Rivkah, but Rivkah, our foremother.
So we're taping this after you've recorded a number of classes and had some experience with some of your students. Tell us about what it's like teaching these Christians and what kind of interaction are you having?
So it's interesting because I really wasn't sure what to expect, both because I've never taught Christians before, and also because when you teach online and there's no face-to-face interaction, it's hard, there's no student faces to read, and that's a very different modality for me to teach. But what I found is from the very beginning, from the very first class, I think I encourage people to be in touch with me, and they are in touch with me, the students that have been studying through my channel, in two ways. One is through the Root Source commentary system, comment system. You know, they look at a lesson, they make a comment. Sometimes it is a question, but it is often a blessing. And also people write to me if they have something maybe more lengthy or more personal. They'll send me an email, and I've been really very touched and very overwhelmed with how many times my Christian students bless me for what I'm sharing with them. And I wasn't really sure how this material would be received. It is my first experience teaching non-Jews, and it's very heartwarming to see that they know the basics of the Bible story, and what I'm adding to that are additional deeper layers of rabbinic commentary, and I can see that it's meaningful for them, and that they are just very heartfelt in what they, in the ways that they thank me. It's so lovely, and it was such a pleasant surprise when I started teaching for Root Source. So the channel that I teach is Women in the Bible, and the course starts with Eve, of course, the very first woman who's named in the Bible, and we take a look at all of the text. That's where we start. All of the text that it has something to do with the story of these women, and then what I add to that is different interpretations of what these texts mean according to the rabbis. I think it's a really interesting way to study Bible, and if you're at all interested in women in the Bible, and the stories of women in the Bible, and in knowing their stories deeper, I hope that you'll come and join us.